All right. Well, welcome one, welcome all. This is week 3 of Skeptic, and we are so glad that you've joined us. Today, we are addressing one of the toughest questions when it comes to the Christian faith. And we're answering the question, why is there suffering and evil? Now, I've been wrestling with this one for a while because I think I'm a pretty good person, but bad things keep happening to me. So, Darin, Pastor Darin, you're gonna have to answer this one tonight. Like, why do bad things keep happening to me? I'm a good person.
Well, where do I begin? That we might need a whole nother seminar on that one, Simon, to be honest with you. Well, we need to talk.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad that we're addressing this question tonight because it really is a question that so many people have, and it's a question when it comes to evil and suffering in our world. It's something that people get tripped up on all the time, and they don't push in and they don't ask the tough questions when it comes to evil and suffering.
Yeah, this is a topic that's been debated literally for millennia,
Yeah.
as we'll probably learn tonight, I'm sure, through some questions and so on. People have been struggling with this question. In fact, this would probably be the number one doubt that has ever entered into my mind when it comes to the existence of God. It would probably be sourced in this area. So what we're going to be talking about later tonight has really come from a lot of thought, a lot of struggle, a lot of even personal pain in my own life. And so it's not just something off the top of my head. This is something that really runs deep in a lot of people's lives, including mine.
Yeah, that resonates with me as well. So if you are joining us, and whether you are you classify yourself as a sinner, or you classify yourself as a saint, or if you classify yourself as a skeptic, we are glad that you're journeying with us. One thing we've learned in this series so far is that rational people can believe in Jesus. Rational people can believe in God, and rational people will always follow where the evidence leads them. And so we are glad that you're here. And if you're still a skeptic and you're journeying with us, we would hope that we are presenting enough evidence for you in this course to help you make a decision in your journey of faith. And if you are journeying along with us, whether it's your first time jumping in now, or if you've been with us all along, if you haven't downloaded your Skeptic booklet yet, you can do that. If you go to bway.ca/skeptic, scroll to the bottom, there'll be a little black button where you can click and it says download booklet now. And you can download the booklet right to your device, and you can follow along the fill in the blanks and get the outline and follow with Darin tonight as he speaks. I should make mention again, the presentation you're about to watch was all filmed pre-COVID. So
Yes.
don't send us any angry emails that we are not social distance and no one's wearing a mask.
So
This
it
was
was all
filmed.
filmed BC, before COVID.
You've been sitting on that joke for a while, haven't you?
I just thought of it right now.
So we filmed it exactly a year ago. So January of 2020, this was filmed. And so normally we would gather a couple hundred people together at Broadway Church at our Vancouver campus. And so we've had to shift, and now we get to do Skeptic online. And hopefully we can reach hundreds of people more by doing this online. And hopefully you're watching from the comfort of your own couch or your bedroom, like I'm in right now. Or you're watching on your phone. I don't know, but we're glad you've joined us. Darin, is there anything else you want to mention before we jump into tonight's content?
No, I just want to remind people, though, I should, yeah, I guess there is. I want to remind people that the number will be at the bottom of the screen, I'm sure, most of the time when I'm speaking. So if you have questions, even if a question pops up while I'm talking, right away, text it to that number. And Simon will then be throwing those questions at me at the end of today's presentation. We'll do a live Q&A. So you don't have to wait till the end. If a thought or question comes to you, fire it off, and Simon will do his best to summarize it and throw it at me. There you go. There's the number on the screen.
Perfect. Okay. Well, with no further ado, Darin, we're excited to hear tonight's talk, week 3 of Skeptic. Why is there evil and suffering in this world? Here we go.
All right. Welcome to week 3 of Skeptic. Now, just to do a quick review of what we've been talking about the first 2 weeks, Our first week we were together, we asked the question, what is the evidence for the existence of God? And we gave various evidences for God's existence. And last week, we then asked the question, so what is the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ? And we looked at some specific historical evidences, some historical facts that are not disputed virtually by historians and scholars and critics of the New Testament. And we looked at how these facts need to be addressed for whatever theory you have to explain the empty tomb, and so on and so forth. And we showed that the best explanation is that Jesus bodily rose from the dead, as Scripture teaches, that he was crucified, he died on the cross, he was placed in a tomb, 3 days later, he rose from the dead. And which brings us to tonight's topic. Now, here's the thing. Some people ask me every now and then, so are you 100% certain that God exists, that there is a God? No. I don't think you can have 100% certainty of anything, truth be told. You can't be 100% certain that you exist as an individual right now. I mean, skepticism ultimately can't be defeated at 100% certainty, meaning, I've heard this proposed, how do you know that you are not a brain in a vat being stimulated by a mad scientist and you just think you're here tonight? You don't know for 100% certainty that you're not that. You don't know that for sure. Now, I don't think I'm a brain in a vat being stimulated, and I think I'm reasonable to think that, yes, I actually exist and you exist as well. And until you can give me a defeater, until you can show me that it's more plausible that I'm a brain in a vat than I'm actually a being who's standing here separate from you right now, until you can give me a defeater that my belief is true, it's plausible, I'm rational to hold to my belief. Well, so all you need to do to have belief is a 51 versus 49%. It's 51% more plausible than 49%. If you have 51% plausibility, you are warranted to rationally believe something. Now, I find the plausibility of God's existence to be far and away greater than the plausibility of the non-existence of God. Years ago, I came to the realization that I simply could not intellectually be an atheist. I came to the realization that I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Even if I didn't want to believe in the existence of God, I couldn't deny reality. I simply have to follow where the evidence leads. So I've moved well beyond the 51 to 49% plausibility threshold. I couldn't put a number to my level of belief, but it's certainly well beyond 51%. If I claim that God does not exist, then I'm stuck with having to believe the following. I have to believe that out of nothing came everything. If I believe that God does not exist, I have to believe that the fine-tuning of this universe is the product of random chance. I have to believe that morality is a man-made, a human-made construct, and we could change it tomorrow if we wanted to. If God does not exist, I have to believe that the morality at table 6 could be that it is okay to murder anybody for any reason, and the morality at table 1 is no, you can't murder anybody at any time, and they would both be right. Morality is just something that we make up on our own. I would have to believe that if I don't believe that God exists. If I don't believe that God exists, I have to believe that there's no satisfactory explanation for the historical facts surrounding the life and resurrection of Jesus. Now, having said all of that, there is one argument against the existence of God that has made me wonder at times. There is one argument against the existence of God that has caused doubt to bubble up within me. And that argument is the argument from the existence of suffering and evil. Now, I've been a pastor for almost 40 years now, full-time as a pastor. And so I've been a pastor for decades, and I also worked with the police service back in Ontario for 7 years as well. So I say all that to say, I've seen a lot of pain and a lot of suffering over the decades. I have held the hand of people when they died. I have stood with parents as together we watched their child die. I've seen a lot of pain. I've seen a lot of suffering. I've been in the trenches. I get it. I understand the questions that suffering produce.
And I've asked the question myself, why is there evil? Why is there suffering? God, if you exist, why? Now, I've learned that not everyone who asks such questions asks for the same reason. And I owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. William Lane Craig for the following observations I'm going to make in the next couple of moments. See, some people are asking from their mind this question. And for them, it's a matter of logic and reasoning. They want to know how an all-powerful and loving God rationally fits within a world of suffering and evil. Other people are asking from their heart. For them, it's a matter of personal pain and doubt. They don't want to know how, they want to know why. They want to know why they or their loved ones are suffering or have suffered. They want to know where God is or where God was in the midst of their pain. But here's the thing. If you answer the person who's asking from their mind as though it was coming from their heart, they'll think you're being unreasonable. They'll think that you're avoiding the intellectually hard truth of the matter, and to them you'll come across as gushy and weak. But on the other hand, if you answer the person who's asking from their heart as though it's coming from their mind, as though it was merely an intellectual or logical question, they think you come across as emotionally cold, calculated, and uncaring. To them, you come across as heartless and insensitive. So this evening, in the limited 3 hours that we have to discuss this, just seeing if you're listening, I'm going to do my best to briefly address both sides, the logical and the emotional. And what I fail to address in my prepared talk, feel free to bring up in the public question and answer portion later in the evening. I look forward to that. That's probably my favorite time of the night. Okay, so let's begin. First of all, as your outline says, let's begin by addressing the mind. That's the first blank in your outline. Let's begin by addressing the mind. I invite you to think about something with me. I would propose to you that you can have the truth without having a lie, but you cannot have a lie without first having the truth. You can have the truth without having a lie, but you can't have a lie without first having the truth. Why is this? Because a lie is a rejection of the truth. A lie is a twisting or a perverting of the truth. A lie takes the truth and corrupts it. So you can't have a lie without first having the truth. It's like rust. You don't just have rust show up out of nowhere. Rust is a corruption of metal. You can have metal without rust, but you can't have rust without first having metal. You can have the truth without a lie, but you can't have a lie without first having truth. With that in mind, now think about this. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without first having good. Why? Because evil is a corruption or a rejection of the good. Just like a lie is a twisting or perverting of the truth, evil is a twisting or a perverting of that which is good. Just like rust is a corruption of metal, evil is a corruption of what is good. You say, Darin, why does this matter? This matters because it holds an answer to the so-called problem of suffering and evil. Why is there suffering and evil? As your outline says, evil is sourced in mankind's ability to choose. Evil is sourced in mankind's ability to choose. Evil and all the suffering that comes with it is sourced in our ability to choose. Evil is what is produced when we freely reject what is good. Evil is what results when we choose to turn our backs on God's goodness. As your outline says, when we reject God's goodness and purity and truth, we create evil. God didn't create evil. When we reject God's goodness and purity and truth, we then create evil. And the more choices we make to reject the good, the more evil and suffering we unleash on our world. Years ago, there was a television interview with a famous Hollywood actress whose lover had drowned in a harbor near Los Angeles. The police investigated, and they revealed that what was happening was they were having a wild party at sea on a yacht, and the man in a drunken stupor rolled off the yacht, and he drowned. And the actress looked into the camera, her face contorted with grief, and she said, "How could a loving God let this happen?" The famous cowboy philosopher John Wayne put it best when he said, "Life is tough, but it's even tougher when you're stupid." God gives us freedom to choose. We make choices, and our choices have consequences. Now, someone is out there, and you're in your mind, and you're objecting, and you're out there, and you're thinking to yourself, hold on, Darin, why couldn't God create a world where we can only choose what is good? He's all-powerful. Why couldn't he create a world where it is impossible to make wrong choices, where it is impossible to choose what is evil? It's a fair question. Let me try something here. Would you come up here for a second? Thank you, please. Let's give this young man a hand. Ben, way to go. Ben, I have fruit in this bag, and I want to give you, because I am all about choice, I want to give you a choice. You can choose from one of these three. You can have this orange, or you can have this orange, or you can have this orange. Do you choose the orange, or the orange? The orange. The orange? Good choice. I'm going to let you have all three of them. Go take a seat. Don't eat those. They're bad. Okay. Did I actually offer Ben a choice? A forced choice isn't really a choice, is it? Someone else, you're out there and you're thinking, well, what makes choice so important in the first place? Why does God have to give us the ability to choose? Now, let me say this. If we didn't have the ability to choose our own path, these same people would be complaining by saying, if God's so powerful, then why can't he let us make our own decisions? What's God afraid of? But putting that aside, it's a question that deserves to be answered. Why is choice so important? This is crucial to understand. Choice is important because God created you to experience the highest possible good. God wants nothing less than the absolute best for you. Well, what is the absolute best? What is the highest possible good? The highest possible good is God himself. God is the greatest conceivable being. And that means God's very nature is the greatest conceivable concept. He is the greatest thing you can conceive of. If you can conceive of a being better than God, then that being is God. God is the greatest conceivable being. By the way, God's not an egomaniac. This explains the whole worship concept. You know, I used to wonder, God, why do you command us to worship you? Like if I stood up here and said, ladies and gentlemen, worship me. You'd think, wow, Darin's got a bit of an issue. Well, why is it wrong for me to do that, but it's okay for God to do that? Why does he command us to worship him? Because God is the greatest conceivable being. And if you focus on anything less than him, it will ruin your life. You'll be settling for less than the absolute best. So God says, listen, I am by nature the perfect being, the greatest conceivable being, and I want the best for you. And so for me to allow you to focus your life or direct your life or pursue anything less than my nature would be to destroy you and to give you less than the best. So God isn't some, some weak or struggling being, and insecure is the word I was searching for. He's not some insecure being up there going, worship me, everybody, love me, love me. No, he's the greatest conceivable being. He doesn't need us. He is perfect in himself. He doesn't need our worship. He didn't need to create us. He wasn't lonely. Yet he's saying, I am the greatest conceivable being, and I want the best for you, and my nature is what is best. So focus upon me. Stay focused on me. Anything less will lead to your destruction. And God's very nature is love. You were created to eternally experience the purest love imaginable. And this highest level of love is experienced through a relationship with the very source of love, this greatest conceivable being, God himself. For you to experience the highest possible good, for you to experience this purest love imaginable, you must be able to choose. Why? Because love cannot be forced upon someone. Love cannot be programmed into someone, because love is a choice. That's why. You can program your computer every morning when you wake up to say, I love you. You can even have this sexy voice make it say, I love you. But I got news for you. Your computer doesn't love you. You can't program love. You can't force love. Love in its purest and highest form is a choice. It's a decision of the will. And when we choose to love, we are achieving and experiencing the highest possible good. However, when we choose to reject love, we are creating evil. And evil produces suffering. Are you seeing it? In order to experience the highest possible good, we must have a world with free choices. And in order to experience the highest possible good, you must have creatures that can freely choose. And having creatures that can freely choose means having creatures that can possibly choose to reject and to rebel. And to reject and to rebel is to create evil. And to evil produces suffering. So it is entirely rational to argue that in order to achieve the highest possible good, it's actually necessary to allow for the possibility of evil and suffering. Okay, that addresses the suffering as a result of human choices, what's commonly referred to as moral evil. But that's not the only form of suffering that takes place. What about the suffering that isn't the result of human choices? What about the suffering tied to earthquakes and tsunamis and tornadoes? This is what philosophers refer to as natural evil. As your outline says, number 2, natural evil is sourced in the natural world that operates according to natural laws. Natural evil is sourced in a natural world that operates according to natural laws. So all the suffering that flows from it is rooted in this natural world. Now let's unpack this a bit. You and I live and interact with one another on a set stage of reality. Think of your life as a drama, and the physical universe is the stage upon which this drama of your life is being played out. You and I live and interact with one another on a stage that's so dependable, so reliable, and so predictable that we actually take it for granted. In fact, this stage, this world, this universe is so dependable, so reliable, so predictable that we talk about it in terms of laws. We call them laws of nature. We have the law of gravity, laws of physics, laws of chemistry, laws of mathematics. By a law, we mean a reality that is dependable, that's predictable, a dynamic that always acts the same way. But when we use the term law, we're using it in a descriptive, not a prescriptive manner. I'm going to say that again. When we use the term law, we're using it in a descriptive, not prescriptive manner. By that I mean, we use it to describe the way things actually behave, not the way they ought to behave. Natural laws describe how things do behave. They don't prescribe how things should behave. We don't say, oh, okay, marker, you're under arrest because when I dropped you, you didn't follow the rate of 10 meters per second, so you're under arrest. No, laws don't prescribe what should happen. They describe what does happen. So then, you and I live and interact with one another on a set stage of reality with dependable laws and constraints. When you came in this evening, you sat down on your chair. You didn't look for a seat belt to hold you down. You don't worry that you're suddenly going to float off to the ceiling. Why? Because the law of gravity is dependable. It's reliable. It's your friend. The law of gravity is your friend unless you're falling from an airplane without a parachute. Then suddenly, this reliable friend becomes an unforgiving enemy. Do you see the dilemma? Do you see the tension that we live in on this set stage of our universe? What is positive can also be negative, and the same thing can be both positive and negative at the same time. At the moment that that guy is falling from the airplane without a parachute, gravity is negative to him. But at that very same moment, that very same gravity is a positive thing to the billions of people who are on the surface of the earth at that moment. As we're recording this evening, it's just been, a week, a little over a week since Kobe Bryant's tragedy. As the reports that I read said that the crash happened, I think, 9:52 a.m., somewhere in there. Now, here's the thing. I knew exactly where I was at 9:52 a.m. I was sitting on the balcony of our main auditorium. One of our staff was speaking, and I was there critiquing. And I actually looked at my watch to see what time and how much time was left in the presentation, and it was 9:52. Now, here's the thing. At that moment, gravity was my friend. It was holding me down in that balcony. At that very moment, gravity was the enemy to everyone on that helicopter. Same gravity, same moment, same planet, same time. Low interest rates are fantastic if you're starting out and trying to buy a home. Low interest rates are terrible if you're retired and trying to live off your savings and your investments. What is positive can also be negative at the same time. We live in a world of cause and effect, and sometimes the effects are wonderful and sometimes the effects are painful. Such is the reality of living in a natural world. Now again, I can hear someone saying, you're thinking to yourself, you're very loud thinkers, by the way. You're thinking, but couldn't God create a world where negative effects don't exist? Couldn't God create a world where all negative effects are immediately overridden and turned into wonderful effects? A fist immediately turns into a feather when you try to punch someone. The sound waves cease to function if you try to curse someone or say something negative. Yes, that's not logically impossible. God could create such a world, but such a world would be madness. It would be a place where real choices from the real you could never be expressed or experienced. Because as your outline says, a world without real choices requires a world without real consequences. A world without real choices requires or produces a world without real consequences. Why is there evil and suffering in our world? We've seen that there are perfectly rational reasons for permitting the presence of evil and suffering. We've seen that achieving the highest good requires the presence of choice. We've seen that the presence of choice requires the possibility of evil, and we've seen that living in a world of natural laws that make science possible, by the way, requires living in a world with real consequences, and not all those consequences will be enjoyable. Now, these answers speak to the mind. These answers are entirely plausible and rational, but these answers rarely satisfy the heart. My experience in participating in debates and witnessing debates with atheists, we'll say, is atheists, my opponents, tend not to appeal to the mind when they address this issue of suffering and evil. They tend to appeal to the heart. They would say on this podium, if this God exists, how could this loving God allow such things? And they will talk of the Holocaust, and they will talk of children drowning. They'll talk about tsunamis and so on. They'll show pictures, and they'll say, why would a loving God allow this to happen? Where is God, this so-called God, when these terrible things happen? Years ago, I remember the moment like it just happened. Good friends of mine, I won't name their names because this is being taped, but they were good friends of mine, my wife and I, and we had a small group together. We met in our home every week and studied together. And this couple were going through some marital difficulties and so on. And in fact, this gentleman, personally, I had prayed with him and led him to become a follower of Jesus. He had some serious issues, some serious troubles in his background, but he was seeking to change his life and make a new start. He's a relatively successful businessman, had his own business with a few different stores that he ran in the area where we lived at the time. And him and his wife had recently become married, and they were going through some marital difficulties. Long story short, after speaking with him on a Tuesday evening, he called me about helping him with this marriage problem. I spoke with him, and that was the last time I ever chatted with him. Because the next day, I got a call and was informed that he lured his wife into their basement, put a gun to her head, killed her, put the gun to his own head, and killed himself. After performing both of their funerals, they were both my friends, I was then in the basement of that home where it happened with the father of the deceased woman. And he and I were kneeling on the floor, painting over the spot where his daughter had been murdered. Painting over the stains, painting over the chalk marks and drawings from the police. And him and I were talking as we were painting. Now, as we knelt together on that floor, painting and talking, that grieving father didn't need his mind to be answered. He needed his heart to be assured. And that brings us to the other aspect of answering this question. After first addressing the mind, we're now going to be, as your outline says, addressing the heart. Addressing the heart. What can we offer the restless heart when it's impacted by evil and suffering? As I stand here today, there's a lot of things I don't know. I don't know what any of the people sitting in front of me are thinking right now. I don't know what any of the people sitting in front of me did before you got here. I don't know what any of you are going to do in the next 30 seconds. I don't even know what I'm going to do in the next 30 seconds, truth be told. I'm that unpredictable. I don't know why you did all the things you've done in your life. I don't know what you're going to do in your life. I don't know why I did everything in my life. I don't always know why I'm doing what I'm doing in my life. I could stand here for hours describing things I don't know and still not exhaust the list. There's a lot of things that I just don't know. 3.5 pounds of brain is a limited space with limited abilities. And with that minor mass of tissue, I'm going to attempt to understand and critique the workings of an eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful, wise, and sovereign God? I don't think so. Let me take a few minutes and speak to you directly from the perspective of a follower of Jesus Christ. At some point, I have to stand back and say, God, I do not have the capacity to understand everything, so I choose to trust you. Well, why, Darin? Why can we trust him? What is it about God that makes him trustworthy when it comes to suffering? That's a fair question. Organizations and religions have all sorts of symbols, don't they? FedEx, for example. In fact, once I show you this, you will never look at the FedEx logo again the same. Just do it from memory here. Fed. Actually, that goes out like that. And then, see, this is all for free. You didn't pay for this. That's the FedEx logo. Let me fix it. And what's unique about the FedEx logo is, I don't know if you see it, but now you'll see it for the rest of your life. There's an arrow right there. See it? That's what they're about. They take packages from A to B. FedEx, that's their logo. It symbolizes what they're all about. The Jewish faith, of course, has the Star of David. A simple star. It's also known as David's shield from Psalm 3:4. God is my shield. The 6 points symbolize north, south, east, west, up, down. God's shield in all directions. Of course, there's the Islam officially doesn't have a logo that's official necessarily, but what's often used is the crescent moon and star. And that's very commonly used as a symbol for Islam. The moon stretches across the path of the entire earth. The 5-pointed stars to symbolize the 5 pillars of Islam. Of course, a lot of Eastern philosophy and religions use the yin-yang, which is sort of like this. And this one side, the one color. I don't have time to fill it all in. And then the two, that's the yin-yang symbol, representing the harmony of everything, dark, light, good, evil, matter, spirit. These are all symbols of religions, organizations. Think about this. What's the symbol for Christianity? A cross. An ancient torture device. Odd choice. Why is the cross an ancient device which was so brutal that Romans even themselves finally gave up on it? It was so brutal. Why is that the symbol of Christianity? Speaking about Jesus, God's Son, who took on human flesh, the Bible says this in Isaiah 53. He was despised and rejected by men. He was a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. This Jesus was arrested under false charges. He was beaten by Roman soldiers. The judge that condemned him to death publicly acknowledged that he actually saw no reason to punish him, but condemned him anyway because he was a coward and the crowd was pressuring him. Jesus was then whipped 39 times. We talked about it. The whip used was called the cat o' nine tails. So on the end of the whip, so this is the leather, this is the handle, and this is the leather. And on the end, they would have, the leather would be frayed, and then embedded into those frayed pieces of leather, they would embed pieces of stone and bone. And so they would grip the back, and grip the body, and tear when you pull back. So you'd whip, it would grip, you pull back, and it would rip entire hunks of flesh out. Often the person didn't even survive the whipping. Organs would be exposed. 39. And it was called the 39. They only do it 39 times because they had calculated that that was the most a human could take without actually dying. So they take it to the edge, but they weren't done yet. He was whipped 39 times. Then he had to carry, with a crown of thorns on his head, to carry a portion of his cross through the streets so he could be spat upon and mocked and taunted. And then when he got to the place of crucifixion, they nailed him to the cross, and he hung there 6 hours before he finally died. And that's why we use the cross. Why can we trust God when it comes to suffering? We can trust God when it comes to suffering because, as your outline says, God himself knows what it's like to suffer. That's why. God himself knows what it's like to suffer. Years ago, I came across this sort of a poem. I just want to read it to you. At the end of time, billions of people were scattered on a great plain before God's throne. Some of the groups near the front talked heatedly, not with cringing shame, but with embittered belligerence. How can God judge us? How can he know about suffering? Snapped a brunette, jerking back a sleeve to reveal a tattooed number from a Nazi concentration camp. We endured terror, beatings, torture, and death. In another group, a man lowered his collar. What about this, he demanded, showing rope burns. Lynched for no crime except being black. We've suffocated in slave ships, been wrenched from loved ones, toiled till only death gave release. Hundreds of such groups were visible across the plain. Each had a complaint against God for the evil and suffering that he had permitted in his world. How lucky God was, they all seemed to agree, able to live in heaven where all is sweetness and light, without any fear or hunger or hatred or weeping. Indeed, what does God know about man? What does he know about being forced to endure the trials of life? After all, God leaves a pretty sheltered life, they said. So each group sent out a leader, chosen because they had suffered the most. There was a Jew, a former slave, an untouchable from India, a person from Hiroshima, and others who had tasted life's bitterest sorrows. At last, they were ready to present their case. It was rather simple. Before God would be qualified to be their judge, he must endure what they had endured. Their decision was that God should be sentenced to live on earth as a man. And because he was God, they set certain safeguards to be sure that he wouldn't be able to use his divine powers to help himself. So they said, okay, let him be a Jew, a perennially persecuted and hunted and hated people. Let the legitimacy of his birth be questioned. Let him champion a cause so radical that it brings upon him the hate, condemnation, and destructive attacks of the political and religious authorities. Let him be indicted on false charges, tried before a prejudiced jury, and convicted by a cowardly judge. Let him see what it is to be terribly alone, completely abandoned by every human being on the planet. And let him be tortured, and let him die. And let his death be humiliating. Let it take place between and beside common criminals while he's jeered at, mocked, and spat upon. As each leader announced his portion of the sentence, loud murmurs of approval went up from the great throng of people. And then, after the last one had finished pronouncing sentence, there was a long silence. No one uttered a word. No one moved. For suddenly, everyone realized God had already served his sentence. Why can we trust God when it comes to suffering? We can trust him because God himself knows what it's like to suffer. But there's another reason why we can trust God in our pain. As your outline says, it's because God uses temporary pain, or he turns temporary pain into eternal gain. He turns temporary pain into eternal gain. God promises to never waste a trial, to never waste a tragedy. In God's kingdom, there's no such thing as disposable difficulties. He turns temporary pain into eternal gain. The Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, he understood suffering. In fact, he wrote a good chunk, as I say, of the New Testament. He had been whipped, beaten, stoned, chained, shackled, imprisoned, shipwrecked, starved, left for dead on many occasions. And this is what he wrote. This is what he learned through his suffering. I quote from 2 Corinthians 4 in the New Testament. Paul says this. He says, I want you to know, we don't lose heart. I'm not discouraged, he said. Though outwardly, we're wasting away, but inwardly, we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles, they're achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Why? Because what's seen, that's temporary. What's unseen, what's inside of us, that's eternal. Paul's saying God turns temporary pain into eternal gain. Yeah, outwardly, it looks bad. I'm wasting away. But inwardly, I'm being strengthened and renewed every day in the midst of it all. These light and momentary problems that I'm having right now, they're actually achieving for me a glory that far outweighs those light and momentary troubles. On a scale, what's happening inside of me is far greater than what's happening outside of me. Let's conclude. We began today by outlining the rational grounds for a world that includes the presence of evil and suffering. We learned that life is lived on a set stage of existence, predictable laws of cause and effect. We learned that life is all about experiencing the highest possible good, the purest love imaginable. And this love requires the ability to choose. We learned that this ability to choose requires the ability to reject, and that rejection creates the presence of evil, and evil produces suffering. Okay then. So we've learned that suffering isn't irrational, but there remains an element to suffering in this life that will remain mysterious. But mysterious doesn't mean pointless. Just because I don't understand the reason doesn't mean there isn't a reason. My wife and I have raised 4 children, and I'll never forget my one son, our youngest son. When he was a little kid, he was about 4 or 5, and he fell down. I can't remember what happened, but he got a cut right here, and it needed stitches. So we had to take him to the hospital, and as we're in the hospital, the doctor said, Mr. Latham, can you hold your son still? So I'm holding his head still. I'm holding his head like this as the doctor brings this big needle to stick it in his wound. And I'll never forget the look of my son. His eyes are tearing up, his big, beautiful blue eyes looking up at me like, you are a monster. What are you doing? He didn't know that I was loving him at that moment. I was helping him. But in his little mind, in his big eyes, he couldn't connect the dots. This evening, we address the logical or intellectual aspect of suffering and evil, and we also address the emotional aspect of suffering and evil. We learn that God isn't heartless and he's not distant from our pain. We learn that God understands our pain. In fact, we learn that God promises to ultimately redeem our pain. And with that, I'm finished. And I turn you loose to discuss this topic around your table for a few minutes before we go to the open mics. Chat away, folks.
All right. Thank you, Pastor Darin. I so enjoyed that teaching, and it's so hope-filled and perspective-filled. It hits me in the feels every time. I'm getting a couple questions in here, and so for all those that are watching live right now, if you want your question answered, feel free to continue to text me in 604-243-4102 as we continue on with this kind of question and answer portion of the evening. Darin, I miss the roundtable discussions. One of the greatest joys of the Skeptic course is sitting around a table with people and discussing and pushing back and asking questions and wrestling through some of these issues together. And so if you're online with us now, this is our round table that we get to participate in together. And so feel free to text me your question, and I'll try to fire as many as I can at Darin here in the time allotted. So
yeah, I used to love after speaking, we'd give about 15, 20 minutes for people to chat. And I would walk through the auditorium there, the gymnasium, and you just hear a buzz in the room as hundreds of people are talking back and forth and asking and challenging. It was great. And then to have the open mics, that's a lot of fun. Well, next year.
Okay, next year. Okay, so here we go. First question. Darin, I've heard on many atheist blogs about something called the Epicurean Dilemma. Are you familiar with this? And if so, how would you respond?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, before tonight's talk, that this has been debated for thousands of years, for millennia. And Epicurus was a philosopher guy from about 300 BC. And he wrote a famous dilemma, as it's called. And that is that if God wants to prevent evil, but he can't, he's not all powerful. If God can prevent evil, but he's choosing not to, then he's not good. So if God's not good and he's not all powerful, then he is no God. So suffering then is evidence for the non-existence of God. So that's been long kind of portrayed in different ways, different websites, different debates, different blogs as this foolproof argument against the existence of God using the existence of suffering. It's been formed into, over the centuries, what's known as the logical argument from suffering. And the logical argument basically goes something like this. It's logically impossible for God and suffering to exist. It's logically impossible for both God and suffering to exist. Second premise, suffering exists. Therefore, God does not exist. So that's kind of the modern version of the Epicurean Dilemma presented thousands of years ago. But here's the thing. Though you'll read the Epicurean Dilemma and the logical argument from suffering, you'll read about it on certain blogs and so on. The truth is that it's been abandoned by atheist philosophers in the last few decades because it's basically been dismantled as an argument. The writings of Dr. Alvin Plantinga really sort of put the death nail into the logical argument from suffering. Because essentially, and we essentially kind of walked through Plantinga's argument tonight, where it's the whole statement that an all-powerful God and suffering can't coexist is defeated by the free will argument. We showed tonight that no, actually, it's logically possible for an all-powerful God and suffering to coexist. That through free will, it's actually necessary for suffering to exist for us to achieve the highest possible good. So the logical argument is no longer being used. But also, as we saw, the whole argument that an all-good God and suffering can't coexist is defeated by the argument that God could have morally sufficient reasons to allow suffering. You don't know why God has allowed suffering. To say that he's not good and allowing suffering, that's proof that he can't exist. No, for all you know, God has morally sufficient reasons to allow suffering to exist. God could be using suffering to achieve an even greater good in the end. Like myself allowing my child to have those stitches done was to achieve a greater good in his life at that moment. Suffering was allowed to achieve a greater good in the end. So the reality is that our perspective is just too small to be able to make these kinds of decisions. We just don't have enough information. So rationally, there is no foolproof argument from suffering against the existence of God. Both free will and the fact that God could have morally sufficient reasons defeat the argument from suffering.
Good. Thanks, Darin. Okay, next question. If God has good reasons for our suffering, like you were just talking about, why doesn't God just like let us in on the secret here? Like, why doesn't he just go ahead and tell us?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you think about it, the volume and complexity of information that God would have to give us could be overwhelming. Because the reason for God allowing something happening in my life today may not be fully revealed for decades or maybe even centuries. It could be setting off a chain of events which has a purpose years from now. There's something called the chaos theory. And the chaos theory goes like this, that the movements of a butterfly's wings on the west coast of Africa could set off a chain of events that could eventually lead to a hurricane over the Atlantic. And there's all these little chains, these dominoes that get knocked over. And it all starts with simply the fluttering of a butterfly on the sitting on a tree in the west coast of Africa. It's called chaos theory. And you could just never be able to trace all of those dominoes from the butterfly to the hurricane. And it's similar with suffering, is that our suffering could very well have all these dots that would need to be connected that we could never connect. And God could never sit down and explain it to us. But even on top of that, the outcome of such a revelation might actually have the opposite effect if you think about it. If we found out that God allowed a certain thing to happen, suffering in my life, in order to patch up some relationship, let's say, between my wife and myself, well, that could bring great resentment in my heart against my wife. Look what your stubbornness is causing. Because you're so stubborn, God had to make this happen in our lives to bring us together. It could actually have the opposite effect from God's intention. So God simply calls us to trust him with his will for the purposes and for the events in our lives.
Good. Thanks, Darin. Hey, I'm getting quite a few questions in about like moral evil versus natural evil. Could you just revisit that again for me? The questions I'm getting in, it seems like people are trying to navigate, like, what about different diseases? And what about like losing your job? That's not a natural evil. It's not really a moral evil. It's no one's fault, but you just lost your job. And now that you lost your job, it causes all this suffering. And so these are the kind of questions coming in. So could you just speak to kind of nailing that down? Like, are there only two camps? Are there only two possible things when it comes to suffering and evil? Is there only moral and natural, or is there something in the middle? And one more thing, and before you get in there, and what about let's say like a disease that is caused by, let's say, someone smoking. So someone gets cancer, but they did it to themselves because of years of smoking or something. So what do you do with all of that?
So yeah, essentially there are two categories, moral evil and natural evil. Moral evil is the result of human choices. The morality, the good versus evil, where we have made choices and suffering is the consequence of those choices. Natural evil are those evils or the sufferings caused by evils that have nothing to do with our personal choices, but are the result of nature, the laws, like diseases that you're referring to, for example, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, accidents. Accidents that are not the result of somebody's choice necessarily, but that's why they're called accidents. Things happen. A bolt breaks on a wheel and a car goes off in a ditch and someone's killed. Now, admittedly, there are some times that these two overlap. Perhaps smoking or maybe drug abuse might be a good example of that, where an individual chooses to ingest some type of chemical, and then the chemical reacts naturally in their life and in their bodies. And so a chain reaction of chemical events takes place. So there's where moral evil and natural evil kind of go hand in glove. But then even that person's addiction may be the result of someone else's natural or moral evil in their life that has led them to a life of addiction. So this kind of illustrates my point earlier that there's dots that, could be connected going back a whole long time. So in a nutshell, there's moral evil, result of human choices, and there's natural evil, which is suffering, which are the result of things that are out of our control completely. I don't know if someone losing a job is necessarily evil. That would be suffering, but I'm not sure I would put that in the category of evil unless their boss fired them for some malicious reason. That would be then moral evil.
Great. Thanks, Darin. Okay. If suffering is a tool in God's hand, doesn't that mean that we would actually be working against God if we try to eliminate suffering in our world around us?
Tricky question. So if suffering is a tool in God's hand, then we would be wrong to be working against suffering because we're working against God. So
right.
Now, if that argument went through, at best, it would be an argument against alleviating suffering. It would not be an argument against the existence of God, first of all. But secondly, there's a difference between God permitting suffering and God promoting suffering. So yes, sometimes God uses suffering. It's a tool in his hands, but that doesn't mean he promotes suffering. We're saying he permits suffering, but that doesn't mean he necessarily promotes it. It could very well be that the suffering is like a barbell, that its usage or its purpose is in us resisting it. So just like when you lift weights, when you resist that barbell and do a bench press, the purpose of that barbell, the purpose of that weight is for you to resist it. That's where the strength comes into your life. And it could very well be that that is the purpose of suffering. It is to resist it. So resisting what God is permitting is not working against God.
Okay, good. Thank you. Every time you answer a question, I want to be like, good answer, good answer. Moving right along. Okay, so this one's going to hit pretty close to home for a lot of people, I think. But this is about God intervening in our suffering and evil. So God is all powerful, and he has the ability to intervene in our suffering and evil. Then why doesn't he, specifically when it comes to the pandemic? So if God can stop the pandemic, why won't he?
Well, again, it comes back to the mystery of why God allows what he allows and why he permits what he permits. But the reality is that we have to trust him in the midst of it all. And the truth is that though there has been some awful things come out of the pandemic, there's also been some incredibly good things that have come out of it as well. At Broadway, we talk a lot about this, that we believe God is turning obstacles into opportunities. So he can certainly use something like a global pandemic to ultimately achieve his purposes. Now, keep in mind that we are not God's pets. And it's not God's responsibility to have us in this nice, warm, cozy aquarium and give us all the best environment possible. That's not how the universe works. God's ultimate goal and purpose in creation is to bring us back into relationship with him. And suffering is one of the ways that God gets our attention. I remember C.S. Lewis wrote, and I'm paraphrasing him now, that, God shouts through our pain. He whispers through, I forget the exact phrase, but he shouts through our pain. It's a megaphone into a world that's ignoring him. And so it could very well be that God is using the pandemic as a way of revealing to people how blind they are to the ultimate realities of their lives. They have this cushy, cozy little life that's really not real. They've insulated themselves from reality, and God has used a pandemic as a way of getting their attention, showing them how fragile and frail they are. Think about this. A pandemic whose survival rate is over 99% has shut down our economy and the whole world. If that doesn't wake us up for us to realize how fragile we are, so humanity is realizing, okay, maybe we're not as tough and strong, and maybe we're not so smart like we thought we were. And one other point I'd like to point out, the reality is that the people's response to God in cultures and in countries where suffering is greatest, that they have the highest response to God. It's the Western world where we have insulated ourselves from every conceivable type of suffering. It's our culture that has wandered away from God. Cultures where there's suffering, they're actually quite close to God and have quite direct relationships with him. So again, suffering can be used by God as a way of arousing people's attention, making them face reality.
I talk to so many people that come through the doors of our church, and I ask them, like, hey, what brought you here today? Or what finds you seeking the Lord today, wherever you are?
Very spiritual.
Yeah, time and time again, though, it was a death in the family that has happened, or I'm going through marriage problems, or I'm looking for counseling because of a loss of job or a change in career, or I have physical pain in my body. There's all these, these sufferings that happen in people, and it seems that those are the things that lead them to seek the Lord. Maybe there's people watching today. Maybe the person asking the question is someone who's experiencing some bit of suffering, and it's led you to the Skeptic course. And maybe God is moving.
Pain gets our attention. And like the Apostle Paul said, we quoted at the end of the teaching today, pain is such a short window. When you look at life and the eternity of life, pain is a dot on a line that spreads into eternity. So we have this temporary struggle has eternal gain. Temporary pain, eternal gain.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay. Now, what about in the Bible, specifically, Darin, when God was the source of evil? Like, what about when God was killing people in the Bible?
Yeah, the classic Canaanites, and the what people often refer to as the extermination of the Canaanites and so on. Now, there's a difference between suffering or a tragedy or something negative happening and evil. God is never the source of evil. People need to understand that people assume that what's wrong for humans is also wrong for God. That's not true. What is wrong for humans is not necessarily wrong for God. You say, how can that be true? Well, think in these terms. I have a tree in my front yard. My neighbor has a tree in his front yard. That tree in my yard belongs to me. I can do whatever I want with it. I can trim it. I can cut it down if I want, as long as it's small enough that the city doesn't forbid it. But I can do what I want with that hedge, with that tree, with those flowers in my front yard. It's my property. I own that tree. I own those flowers. I own that hedge. I can do what I want with them. My neighbor's tree, my neighbor's flowers, my neighbor's hedge, that's a different story. I have no right of ownership over those. They're his property, and he can do what he wants with them. So for me to do with my property what I want, that's up to me. For me to go over to his property, that would be wrong. All creation is God's property. So for a human to kill another human, you're killing God's property. God says, no, you can't do that. You just can't randomly go killing someone. All humanity belongs to me. I set the rules, God says. But God himself, he owns all of humanity. And if he wants to take a life, he can take a life. If he wants to take my life, he created me, he owns me, he can do it. It's up to him. So when it comes to the Canaanites, so these were ancient people centuries ago who were hunting down the Israelites. For hundreds of years, they were hunting them down, trying to destroy them. God gave them, I think it's 400 years. He gave the Canaanites 400 years to change their ways. He sent preachers to them to try to get them to repent. And the Canaanites didn't. They wouldn't. In fact, archaeologists and historians, we've dug up some stuff and some documents and some tablets and so on. We have a pretty good sense of what these Canaanites were like. They were a terrible, cruel, vicious people. They were into child sacrifice, bestiality, all sorts of debauchery. They worshiped this god called Moloch, where Moloch was this giant stone statue, and they would place babies in the arms of the statue with fire underneath, and they would sacrifice their babies, and these burning, screaming babies dying at the hands of these Canaanites. These were a debauched, debased people. And God gave them hundreds of years to repent, and they wouldn't. They refused. So God finally said, all right, I am now going to use the nation of Israel as a way of chastising, as a way of dealing with this cancer, which is sort of it's like the flesh-eating disease the Canaanites were. If God didn't deal with them, they would have destroyed society, destroyed culture. So God used Israel as his scalpel, and he went and he chased out the Canaanites from the land of Israel. Now, it wasn't a matter where God said, go and run after them, and if they leave the city, chase after them. No. God warned the Canaanites and that he would destroy them if they didn't leave. So the Israelites were coming to a city, and most of the Canaanites would leave, but God said, whatever ones remain behind, don't spare them, kill them, destroy them. And so that's what it was. But it wasn't a matter of, it wasn't genocide. That's the word I was looking for. It wasn't a genocide where God said, every Canaanite in the world, hunt them down and kill them. No, it was, go and take over those cities where the Canaanites are living. Whatever ones run away, let them run away. Whatever ones stand back to fight you, you destroy them, because I've warned them, I've given them hundreds of years, and now I'm taking action. My patience has run out with them. So again, that's God's prerogative. He can do that. He's a just God. He's a holy God. He's the creator of all heaven and earth. And if he wants to do that with the Canaanites, he can do that. He owns them.
Thanks, Darin. Okay, this one is about, this is an opinion piece here. We need some help here. This is like a Ask Sophie, dear Sophie here. Okay, Darin. So when there's the existence of moral evil in churches, let's say, and that evil seems to be tolerated or even ignored, how should a Christian respond?
Well, actually, Scripture gives us what to do in situations like this. It tells us if we're aware if someone has sinned against us, then we should go to that individual and confront them and gently do that. And hopefully they'll repent and address it. And if they won't, then we're to bring someone else with us and point it out. And if they still won't, then we're to go to the church, Scripture says, which would assume would be the leadership, and take it to them. And hopefully then the leadership will address it. Now, this person, it might be saying, well, what if the leadership is corrupt itself in the church? Well, then, depending on the religious organization you're in, there's levels of submission, levels of authority. You would take it to your denominational or your religious hierarchy and report to them what you have, what you're aware of. And again, you would have to have evidence for this. You can't just go making random accusations. You would have to present your evidence and your reasons why. So there'd be a fair hearing. And you say, well, what if I have all the evidence and they're still ignoring it? Well, then I would leave that organization. Clearly, you're in an organization that is looking the other way at every level and at all times. And why would you want to be a part of a group like that?
Thanks, Darin. Okay, this one just came in. Somebody just sent in the C.S. Lewis quote that you were
Oh, good.
that you were looking for. We can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to our consciences, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. C.S.
Thank
Lewis.
you.
Yeah, from the book The Problem of Pain.
The Problem of
So,
Pain. Great book, by the way. If someone's really interested in this topic, C.S. Lewis, The Problem of Pain is a great book. And it's not a real big book either. It's very readable.
I love that someone out there is like, they're feeling you were there with the whisper
yes.
something, he shouts something else.
Shout in megaphone. I knew that.
Good. So whoever you are out there, thank you for sending that in. Okay,
Yes.
Here we go. Isn't religion, Darin, the biggest source of evil in human history? Like, what about all of the suffering and evil that's ever come and caused by those religious wars that have happened in history and are currently happening?
Yeah, you hear this a lot. I mean, Sam Harris and another speaker, one of the five horsemen of the apocalypse, whatever, I forget his name, the atheist horseman used to say all this. I'm drawing a blank on his name now. But they talk
okay,
about
Darin, somebody will text me in his name.
Somebody will. Thank you. I love live Q&A. Yes, where it's they would often say that, religion is the source of all evil in the world. You often hear that, and people talk about the Spanish Inquisition or the Salem witch trials and all the evil stuff the church has done. Now, understand this. This is a fascinating discussion here. I am not defending the evil that the church over the centuries has perpetrated on humanity. And it's shameful what the church has done. There have been times in history when the church has done wrong. And whenever they have done wrong and done evil, it is not in agreement with what Jesus has said or what Scripture teaches. It is in opposition to what Jesus said and Scripture teaches. Like we said earlier, moral evil is you can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. Evil is a twisting, a perverting of that which is good. So anytime in history when the church has done evil, been the source of evil, it's been because they've rejected God, not because they've reflected God. Well, that's pretty good. That's the big idea. It's because they rejected God, they didn't reflect God. But here's the thing. There's a book, or actually it's a set. We talked about an easy book to read, Problem of Pain, C.S. Lewis. There's a 3-volume set called Encyclopedia of Wars by Phillips and Axelrod. They're not Christ followers that I'm aware of, but it's a 3-volume set, Encyclopedia of Wars. It's like several $100s for this set. But they have listed all the known wars throughout history. Okay. And they counted them up and classified them and so on. And in this book, Encyclopedia of Wars, they counted there are 1,763 wars in history. 1,763 wars. Of those 1,763 wars in history, 122 of them were religious wars. So 122 out of 1,763. And those 122 wars accounted for 2% of all deaths from wars in human history. But it gets even more interesting. Of those 122 wars, 66 of them were Islamic, were fought on the grounds of Islam. So if you remove the Islamic wars, then only 3.14% is the numbers I remember. 3.14% of wars in the history of humanity were religious wars. With less than 2% would be of all known deaths attributed to religious wars. So, this whole argument, from the Spanish Inquisition, the numbers I've read is 3,000 to 5,000 people died during the Spanish Inquisition. Salem witch trials, 20 to 35 people died. But so this is very small. It was wrong. Those things were wrong, but we're talking a very small. But here's where it gets even more interesting, Simon. So we've talked about religion, but let's talk about atheism for a moment. This is fascinating. In less than 20 years, the atheist state of China is reported to have murdered 26 million of their own people. In fact, the U.S. Senate and the Senate committee back in the 70s claimed it was somewhere between 32 and 62 million people were slaughtered by the atheist nation of China. USSR Solzhenitsyn claimed that that whole Gulag nation there, that the official atheist state of the Soviet Union, they killed 66 million of their own people. Pol Pot, the atheist leader of Cambodia, it's said that he slaughtered 1/3 of his population, which was about 2.5 million people. So in the last century, just the last century, atheist governments were responsible for over 100 million people slaughtered. So that says two things. It says, first of all, this is not a uniquely religious problem. And secondly, it tells me that this is a human problem.
Wow, good. Thank you. I don't know if you have notes in front of you, or you're just pulling these numbers and stats from the back of your brain from the years of you going through this material. But
yeah,
Darin, thank you. I appreciate your wisdom and your sensitivity on this. It is a very sensitive subject, and like you said in your talk tonight, the idea that sometimes when we answer it, it's all with our mind or our brain, and sometimes it's all with our heart. And all the different people listening to this course right now, they might be coming in, and even the people texting me in, they might be asking questions with their mind. Others are asking with their heart. And so it's hard to address and know how to individually handle each question. But I think you've done a great job tonight, if I do say so.
Did my best.
So thank you. Okay, so next week, we're going to continue on with Skeptic, week 4, and we're going to be talking about world religions a little bit, all right? So we're going to be answering the question, like, why do Christians think they got it right? Like, what about all religions? What about all the other religions?
How intolerant are we that we say we're the only ones who have it right, and all the other millions, billions of people in the world have it wrong? How dare we say that? We're going to address that next week.
Yeah, it's a good one. And so I just want to encourage everyone that's watching this week 3, please come back week 4, bring your skeptic friend, share widely the invitation. If you know someone that is practicing a different faith, another religion, get them to tune in. And we're going to be talking about lots of different religions, all the other world religions. We're going to deal with them and address the topic, what about other religions? So, yeah. Darin, you get the last word today. Anything you want to say as we say farewell?
I hope I didn't cause a lot of suffering in people's lives by so much talking tonight. That's all I can say.
Okay, that's good. And on that note, we'll sign off. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week as we do week 4 of Skeptic. We'll see you.